I'm thrilled for this afternoon. I was trying to think of how to express this in words, and I'm a social scientist, so, significance, highly significant, but I'm thrilled. It's really my pleasure to introduce our final plenary session of the afternoon of this conference. We've covered a lot of ground over the past day and a half, discussing research on early childhood development, the impact of community conditions on children, and building workforce skills through education and youth programs. Our final keynote speaker, Mr. Geoffrey Canada, founder of the Harlem Children's Zone, will wrap all these issues together. In his 20-plus years with the Harlem Children's Zone, Mr. Canada has become nationally recognized for his pioneering work, helping children and families in Harlem, and as a passionate advocate of educational reform. Mr. Canada's full and detailed biography can be found in the conference app and on the conference website. The Harlem Children's Zone strategy intersects child development and community development with a birth-to-college approach by providing parent education, early learning programs, and charter schools, as well as supports for housing and healthcare. It's an innovative approach that has fostered a number of similar efforts across the country, including one in my hometown in the neighborhoods of the north side of Minneapolis called the North Side Achievement Zone. Following Mr. Canada's remarks, Dr. Victoria DeFrancesco Soto will facilitate a conversation with Mr. Canada before we open it up to the rest of you in the audience for questions and comments. Dr. DeFrancesco Soto is a political scientist who provides political analysis on US politics and its implication for countries abroad. She obtained her PhD in political science from Duke University and is currently a professor at the University of Texas, and teaches in the Department of Mexican American and Latino Studies, and is a fellow at the Center for Politics and Governance at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. Please join me in providing a very warm welcome for Mr. Geoffrey Canada.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am very excited to be here. My board chair is in finance. Is my mic good? Okay, thank you. My board chair is in finance. He's been my partner in all this work, Stan Druckenmiller. And I forgot to tell Stan I was coming to talk to the Fed. And so I called him once the plane landed in Washington. I said, "Oh, Stan, I forgot to tell you, I'm going to talk to the Fed." And he was like, "Oh, you're talking to the Washington Fed?" I said, "No, I'm talking to like the real Fed, like the whole." And he was like, "Come on." Sometimes people who really know you, they don't really know you. They're not very impressed. So you can read a lot of stuff about, different awards and everything else. But my big challenge in life is to impress my wife. Now, I love my wife. She's a Harlem girl. She grew up in Harlem. We have a lot of similar experiences. And I just keep trying to impress her. So finally, one day I knew I had it. Now, when Fortune magazine had rated me the 12th most influential person in the world, I got those magazines, right? That's okay. I got those magazines. And I went home, I put them on the kitchen table. I said, Yvonne, look. She said, "What?" I said, no, turn to page 23. She turned, she looked, she said, "Couldn't break into the top 10, huh?" That was it. I was just like, what is that about? Come on. So sometimes, I'm glad you all at least want to see me and are excited. So I'm going to say something. And I feel like, I just turned 65 and retired from the Harlem Children's Zone 2 years ago. And I just love America, like for real, right? I mean, this is not something that I say. A lot of people say, "I love America." No, but if you grew up where I grew up and you end up having the experiences that I have had, you just have a different appreciation, I think, for what it means to be in this country. And I have been on a mission to say to people in this country, we are in real trouble when it comes to what's happening in America. And I am worried that I'm running out of time to get folks to really understand how serious this is. Some of this, I mean, when I saw this is about youth and community, that's right in the sweet spot of what I care about. And I'm going to say some things about that. But I'm also going to say some things about what I think is hindering the progress we need to make in this country, and it has a lot to do about race. So let me get to the first thing first, community, and why the work I do, which people constantly misunderstand. When people talk about the Harlem Children's Zone, it's never introduced the way it was today, that we're really focused on community. Usually people talk about the charter schools or education or youth development, but that's not who we really are. We had one mission, which was to end generational poverty in a place that it had continued for generations. And that meant we had to change community. So I got this idea when I was very young. I grew up in the South Bronx in the 50s and the 60s. And if you're my age, you know that the South Bronx became famous when president after president would stand in the rubble of the South Bronx and take a picture and have a photo op and promise they were going to transform urban America. That rubble was my community. And I saw it before it began to crumble, and I watched it crumble, and I made a decision when I was young that I would do everything possible to get out of this place because I knew my odds of making it were just about nil. And the reason I'm here today is that my grandparents moved to Long Island, and I went to stay with them instead of going to a high school, a dropout factory in the South Bronx, where my life would have basically been destroyed. And so in many ways, this whole thing came down to chance. And when I talk about community, the reason I believe it's the key. So I told you I'm 65. All the guys I knew growing up, dead. Two folks, one is suffering from lung cancer, the other one is waiting on a kidney transplant, and that's it. Growing up in the wrong place in America is a killer on every level. It starts from birth, and it just constantly wipes out one cohort after the other, after the other, after the other, till you look around one day and no one's left. That this should be happening in America today, right now, is something that I find un-American. And I believe that, as I was thinking about sort of what is it about place, I believe that we're getting closer to understanding some of this stuff. Some of the things that you find right away, lousy schools. Lousy schools for kids who have, all the challenges and disadvantages in the world. I'm a huge believer in early childhood. We started out with our baby college for parents and a really strong pre-K program. And we really believe that, you've got to make that gap up. My good friend, Art Rolnick, has probably talked to folks about this issue, but we are both believers in this. But this is what I found. These vulnerable kids who already are behind end up in schools which they've just failed for generations. And this, I got in a lot of trouble around education stuff because it makes me angry that you could have a business that is failing And the evidence of that failure is clear, it's unambiguous, and it's reported yearly. And yet it feels no pressure to change whatsoever. It's created a set of excuses where, it's all about parents and children, has nothing to do with the professionals who are in that job. I think, that we've got to take that institution on. So, people in education, they think I'm a rebel because I say these like crazy things. Like, if you're a teacher and you can't teach, you should probably get another job, right? Now look, y'all are clapping, but someone right now is tweeting, there he goes again, beating up on teachers, right? I mean, the union vilified me. But listen what I said. I didn't say if you were a mediocre teacher. I said if you can't teach. Now, what profession could someone be angry at you if you say, now look, if you're a hairdresser and you can't do hair, get another job. Does that mean now I'm beating up on hairdressers? But this is what I'm going to tell you this. If there was a law in America that every week you had to go to a bad hairdresser and they were going to mess your hair up every week, right? And nothing you could do because it was against the law not to go. And you'd have to go in there and come out, your hair be all messed up. There'd be a revolution in America, right? People wouldn't stand for it. Think about those kids. They have to go to school. They have to. It's the law. We have the evidence. We know what's going to happen to those kids. I told you I escaped going to Morris High School by staying with my grandparents. The schools I went to, the elementary and middle schools, which were poor, 60 years ago, those schools were lousy. You know something about a lousy school? It's not like a bottle of wine that you say, yeah, the 80s were a good year. They are lousy every single year. You go in that school today, it is taught the same way that it was taught when I was there. It starts at the same time, it ends at the same time. Now, the South Bronx is not a small place. You're talking 60 years. I'm not talking about 50,000 kids, 100,000. We're talking millions of kids whose lives were destroyed. They're just destroyed. This happens all over America. So, part of the challenge in these communities, we've got to deal with the issue of schools. Now, here's the other problem. We had a social policy in America. Also, there's a racial component to this that said, we know what's going to happen in these communities where these schools are lousy, these folks aren't going to have any skills, they're going to end up not being able to enter into the labor market. And guess what? They're going to do some stuff. And we're going to make sure we're going to lock them up. And we have locked up more people in this country than any place on the face of the earth. More per capita. It is unbelievable what's going on. And that has continued. And look, we didn't just lock people up. Then you started getting into the 70s and the 80s, and they started having mandatory minimums. They wouldn't even let a judge have discretion. They decided they're going to give this young person 30 years. Right? They're getting tough. Well, they're getting tough on drugs. Does anybody think all that toughness on drugs, we have any less drugs in America today than we had 25, 30 years ago? No, we have more. The whole thing was a failure, but we wiped out a whole generation of guys. Happened all to be black and brown. Now, I have a little news for folk. Black and brown people weren't the only ones using drugs. Because I'm going to just say this. I'm going to get in trouble. I hope my son doesn't see this. Because I went to Bowdoin, right? It was up in Maine. And I'm from the South Bronx. You know what I told the folks when I came home? I said, boy, they got the best drugs up there, those white folks. They got all the good drugs. The stuff we using down here ain't very good. Now, Some of y'all know I'm not joking. I did grow up in the 70s. I'm not going to go no further down that road down. Okay, this issue, now remember, my belief is that some of these problems that could be solved, except this issue of race gets in the way of us coming up with big solutions. So, I'm going in these communities, I see them. If I called out the places that are failed communities, people would know, and I talk about the Detroits and parts of Chicago and parts of Milwaukee and South Central and the Harlems and the best. I talk about it, yep, we got it. Those have become the defining images of poverty and despair in America. But I found out something really different when so after I finished Bowdoin, I went to the Harvard School of Education, and after I got my master's degree, I started working in Boston, 1975. So you know Boston 1975, you don't know Boston 1975. We were right in the middle of desegregation, and it was crazy. There was all kinds of violence about these black kids going in the buses. It looked just like Selma, right, back in the 50s and the 60s. I had never seen anything like it, right, in a northern city. This stuff was serious, and I wondered, I thought I was like this hotshot Harvard kid. I kept wondering, why these folks, they were so happy to hire me. Why they said, oh, we want you, Mr. Canada. So then I realized the kids in this school, they were all the kids who were expelled from the schools that were trying to be integrated, right? From Charlestown, South Boston, East Boston. These were all the shock troops, these kids, who were the ones throwing the bricks and other things. So all of these white kids, mostly Italian and Irish, and they did all of that stuff to stop black people from coming into their schools. They got kicked out of their schools, and who walks into their classroom? Me. They took one look at me. I tell folks this was the teacher's equivalent of guess who's coming to dinner, right? These kids took one look at me, and I was like, what's wrong? But this changed my view of poverty forever, because I went to see where these kids lived. I had to go really early in the mornings. It's a little dangerous. Projects. And this is going to sound trite, but it wasn't. I was serious. I said to folks, all these projects, they're all white people? They said, yeah. I never saw white people in the projects before. I was looking at them. They started looking at me. I said, I better go. They go. I knew my kids, those white kids, they were just like the kids I grew up with. They had all the same characteristics. I mean, there was this whole race thing. They had the same characteristics. I was like, wow, there's no difference. If you grow up really poor in isolated communities and you feel like you're the underdog and nobody cares about you and you have no future, you just end up doing all kinds of things that destroy your life. So I quickly understood that this racial lens we were looking at some of this stuff through was totally artificial. It was totally artificial. So my second hint of this came in realizing what had happened around unwed births in America. So again, you have to be my age. 1965, Patrick Moynihan did a report called the Moynihan Report, and he looked at the sort of increasing unwed birth rates in African Americans in the country. And he wrote a report which was very controversial because he said something was happening inside the black family. There was some sort of dysfunction, and he was trying to trace it back maybe to slavery or Jim Crow, and he was trying to figure out why all of a sudden these family connections were breaking apart and these women were having babies out of wedlock. And there were in 65 was 24%. Today, 29% of white families have babies out of wedlock. Numbers are much higher, in the mid-50s for Latinos, in the low 70s for African Americans. So Moynihan's analysis that there was something in the black family happened to be wrong. There was something happening in America that was impacting all families, but the most vulnerable families were feeling it the worst. And so you could see it there. But starting to ascribe sort of racial or other overtones masked the fact that this was an American phenomenon. Now, I began to think about, how do you get at this thing? If there is something happening and community is part of it, how do you get at this? Well, in the time I was writing my second book about boys, and I really started following William Julius Wilson's work. And if you haven't read When Work Disappears, you should. Here he made, to me, just this brilliant case of what happened to African Americans as they came from the South, which my grandparents did, moved to the northern cities for jobs, and became immediately working in middle class, and then those jobs disappeared. And when those jobs left, all kinds of dysfunction began to happen. And he attributed it not to race, but to the fact that the economic structure that was gluing communities together began to fall apart, and it had all of these other impacts. Well, I had seen that with my own eyes. I had watched my community just implode. And I thought, you know what, there must be something to this. More recently, you take a look in, a lot of folks didn't read Charles Murray's book, the name Coming Apart, The State of White America. A lot of my friends wouldn't read the book because they remember Murray from the bell curve, which was so insulting. Everybody hated him. But I said, yeah, forget the bell curve. You need to read this book, because this book talked about a phenomena happening in white America where jobs and lack of education and lack of hope was destroying communities across this country, and Murray had the numbers, and he detailed it in explicit fashion. You could not, in fact, Murray said, I intentionally did not talk about black people because I don't want anybody getting this thing confused. This is about what's happening to white America. Their families are falling apart. Their kids are becoming hooked on drugs. They're not able to get jobs. This thing is deteriorating all around us. And nobody I knew about it, nor did they care about it. I couldn't even get anybody to care about it. You read J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy. A lot of people are reading that. They're like, oh, look at this. Check this out. Yes. Yes. He's talking about a white family, right, with all this dysfunction. Here's why I think this matters. If I'm worried about my children, if my children aren't going to make it, and I think government wants me to help those children over there, I have no interest in that. When this is all about those other kids and not about my own kids, when I see everybody only cares about this group of kids, while I see all the kids in my community ending up getting hooked on drugs and having babies and not able to get jobs, I'm not interested in that. So I've been yelling about this. Sorry, I'm yelling at you all now. I've been yelling about this for some years now. And I really couldn't get anybody to pay any attention to it. Because, as part of what Murray says, we've managed to create communities where you simply don't come in contact with these folks. You just don't see them. It's not like people are hard-hearted. They just don't see them. You just don't know. But if you travel around, it's America. All I thought about election night, when you begin to see all of that red across America, you should go see what's going on in there. You should go look at those downtowns and see half the stores boarded up and the guys hanging on a corner like they used to do in Harlem, you would see that this thing is really serious. And I thought there were two people in this last election who understood something about that. Bernie and the president. I didn't think anybody else had a clue. And this phenomenon that's going on, continuing in America, I think is what I decided I was going to tackle when we began the Harlem Children's Zone in Harlem. I was convinced that if you let a community fall apart and you decide you're going to take a strategy, let's say you're going to educate some kids, that's your strategy. Well, guess what happens when those kids get an education? They do what I do, what I did. I got out of there as quickly as I could. So you're not rebuilding anything. You're just taking all the talent and sending all the talent someplace else. And then the folks who are left, they're just trapped there. So I thought the only thing we could do was actually rebuild that community. And the one thing that I think people struggle about our work was that we believed that you had to go block by block, building by building, starting with community and saying to people, we're coming back to make this place a better place for you to live. And then we were going to do stuff. We were going to clean up the empty lots and turn them into community gardens. We were going to get rid of the abandoned cars on the road. We were going to eliminate the graffiti and say to people, we want this place to be so nice that when your kids graduate from college, they want to come back here. They don't want to go someplace else. They're going to say that this community is a community that cares about us, and it's a good community. Now, originally we started this, nobody, people say, oh, that Jeff, he's got a great idea, but that's kind of crazy. You're not going to go fix this stuff up. And it's funny because our biggest funder, the person who funded us for the foundation person, I won't mention the name, we were doing a site visit. We used to go into the houses and we would show folks that we were going to get the city to redo these houses and people could buy their apartments and all of this stuff. And we were walking with his trustees and he said to me, he pulled me aside, he said, Jeff, boy, this is great. I really wish you could really do this. I was like, you're funding us and you don't believe it? I mean, what? But the concept that people had, they just were like, you can't do that, right? So what did we do? This is the basic steps, rebuilding community. We lived with 97 blocks. We went to every block. We created block association, went in every building. We created building associations. We physically changed the conditions of those blocks. We got rid of the garbage. We got rid of the trash. We planted trees. We planted flowers. And we learned stuff, right? And I learned stuff, right? I remember I said, we were going to put, you go down Midtown in the spring, they have all the tulips out and blooming and everything. And one of my staff said, we should do that uptown in Harlem, Jeff. I said, nah, I think those people are going to steal those tulips. We planted those tulips. Didn't nobody take those tulips. I was so ashamed. I said, I shouldn't be thinking about my people like that, right? But you don't know. Everybody, you have all of these misconceptions about what it really means to be. People wanted a nice place to live. They wanted it to look, they wanted folks to come on their block and say, wow, look at this, that's really nice. Deal with the police and crime. There was a lot of mistrust. We became the intermediaries in that, but you could not. I made it clear. I told folk, we're going to help folks get jobs, but people are not going to be selling drugs on the street as if this is a business, right? That's your business, you're going to sell drugs. No, we're not having that. That's over. That's what I said. It's a little controversial, but this is what I told folks. I want people to sell drugs in Harlem the way they sell drugs in the suburbs, quietly and anonymously, right? I can't give it. There's as much drugs in Harlem as there was, yes, but you will not see it on the streets. My kids are not growing up thinking this is just normal, that's going to be their job, right? People now know that's not allowed. And, this idea of changing what the expectations are of young people of community we felt that that was critical. And our goal was to get our kids in college. Right? One simple goal, and the reason, so look, there's nothing magical about having a college degree, right? It doesn't mean necessarily you're going to be employed, but I believed that we had to have all the staff understand that the only credit they were going to get was if our kids went to college and got through college. Because I thought, in the end, that's the only way you level the playing field. Now, people have gotten on me about this, and some people have called me an elitist. I can't believe all those kids. You think all those kids are going to go to college? And I look, listen, again, I always kind of signal when I'm going to say something controversial. It's a little controversial, but this is what I tell people. So you may feel one way or another about this whole college thing. It's what I tell folks. When you're not sure about something, always do what rich people do. That's my belief, right? That's just my belief. So I have to raise a lot of money. We have to raise about $60 million. So you have to raise a lot of money. So that means I have to know a lot of rich people. I tried raising money from poor people. I'm just saying, it didn't work for me, right? So now I've got this whole group of rich people, and I noticed this, and if someone here is going to dispute this today, I've done this all over America, and in fact, all over the world. I've never had anybody dispute it, but maybe somebody will right now. I have never met a rich person who did not expect their kid to go to college. Never. And by the way, I know some of their kids. A couple of them, I don't know about that one there. So my theory is, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for my kids. Why not? Now, wait, all my kids don't end up going to college. We probably get about 90, 95% end up going off. But my wife and I, we have 4 kids, right? 3 of them went to college. 1 didn't. We had the same expectations for all of them. By the way, I think that's one of those rules. If you've got 4 kids, one of them is not going to do the right thing. Don't be upset, say, oh, what did we do wrong? No, just deal with it. It's okay, right? That's just how it is. This idea, though, so this is, when we started this, there was a group, I'll never forget, it was at Teachers College in Manhattan. There was a group of education researchers from all the Ivy League schools, other schools besides Ivy League, and I was their keynote speaker, and I was talking about the zone in this plan, and one of them got up, he was a researcher, said, Jeff, there's no evidence we've ever seen that anyone has ever done this any place in the world, but I don't want you to be discouraged, but it ain't gonna happen, right? That's what he said. So when we started out, we had, 20 kids in college, and then 75, 100, 300. Today we have 950 kids in college. We're graduating. That's not. Let me tell you why that's significant. So we're graduating 100, 150 kids a year with degrees, right? Let me tell you why that's significant. Because 15 years ago, if you were in Harlem, you stopped a kid, just stopped a 12-year-old. Say, look, do you know anybody in college? He say, boy, I think there's this girl over on 117th Street in college. He said, could you go to college? No, no one. You have to be a genius to go to college. You know what happens when you have 900 plus kids in college and they all come home on spring break and they all come home for the summertime and my kids are growing up and they just see that, yes, one of those kids, you think you'll go to college? You know what they says? If he can go to college, I know I can go to college. Are you kidding me? I mean, because it becomes normal. It becomes not like some great, it's like a regular expectation that that's what I'm going to do. So all my kids believe they're going to college, and we think that, you know what happens when you believe you go to college? You don't end up on a corner selling drugs. None of my kids, I used to be able to say up until 6 months ago, I did not ever have even one kid, now we have one kid, who's been arrested in doing time. Doesn't happen. Teenage pregnancy rates, probably one of the best. We could be calling this a teenage pregnancy prevention program, right? Girls who are going to college, they don't get pregnant. That's not what they want to do. This is not, I mean, they have a plan of what they want to do with their life. So we think that this idea that you want to change that cultural context in a community from one where kids feel like there's no hope to one where kids feel like, yes, I'm going to have a good life. Now, the part of this that I think is important is also scale. We decided we had to deal with more than 10,000 kids, right? Because we had to say to folk that, this is about a community and kids do what their friends do. And if your friends all get high, you get high. If your friends all go out and hustle, you hustle. So we wanted to make sure our kids were growing up among other kids who had the same expectations. And the last thing about this is all about data and evaluation. Now, if you work in this population and you think you're doing good, and you don't have any real evidence, objective evidence that you're doing good, you're probably not doing good. It is really hard. And one of the things I tell people about collecting data is if you're in these communities, the data is going to be bad. And so unless you like looking at bad data, right, you're not going to be happy. We've learned ways around dealing with bad data, which my chief operating officer and I, we have a very transparent thing. You have to put your data up on the wall. Everybody sees it. We look and see where you are, what's going good, what's not. What we tell one another is the longer they talk before they get to the numbers, the worse the numbers are going to be, right? They're up there, they say, Jeff, now, I'm going to tell you about our parents' night. It was really great. We had over 150 parents came out, and the kids loved it. And we're sitting there saying, yeah, when you going to do the reading scores? We're going to see, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. The people who had good stuff, they would come up and they'd say, so this is where we were in October. Look here. Now, look. See that? And every month we've been, this idea that you've got to be data-driven is the only way that you're going to really make these kind of efforts work. You've got to have real evidence to make a difference for these kids. Now, I'm going to leave you with a challenge, which is that when we talk about an infrastructure arrangement, we know the president's talked about $1 trillion. That's for bricks and mortar. We need to be talking about some real investments in communities, for real. If I went out and said we need to raise $20 billion, people would be like, oh, you can't possibly do it. That would be a good start to get some of this work done. I'm going to just challenge you all to think about all of the kids in America and our responsibility to keep this country great. And I'm telling you, unless we take a hard look at what's going on across this whole country, we're not going to be able to keep our country great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you.
It is my honor and pleasure to be your Latina Oprah for the next 20 minutes. So I'm going to ask a couple of broad questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. But my first question is, how do we export the Harlem Children's Zone? So I'm thinking, I grew up in southwestern Arizona, rural town, podunk town. So how do we take that magic that happened in Harlem and take it to Sierra Vista, Arizona, take it to Charleston, South Carolina, take it all over, and not losing sight of the importance of context, something that researchers here have been doing a phenomenal job in looking at, but on the ground, what does it mean?
So that's a great question. President Obama had decided that he was going to use our model and replicate it in 20 places across the country. And created something called Promised Neighborhoods. And it exists, and Promised Neighborhoods exist. And I know that some of the folks, people have always asked me, what does it take to be successful and do this work? And we've got some places that are really doing the work with the real data and real kids and rebuilding their communities. And I know the folks from Minneapolis, the North Side Achievement Zone are here. And I will say that it is hard to replicate this, right? Because you have to run multiple programs in a geographic area and deal with scale. But it is not by any means impossible. There are a couple of rural places that are doing it also and doing really a good job. And we created something called the Promised Neighborhoods Institute that's run by Policy Link out in Oakland, California, which is the technical support arm of this. The challenge with Promised Neighborhoods was The president originally, President Obama, originally talked about $1 billion to do, and he could never get the Congress to really fund this at a level that I thought would allow the kind of scale we were hoping for. But the infrastructure exists, the technical assistance exists. We're hoping that we'll be able to get some real dollars in that. And by the way, we always insisted on private dollars as a match. We just never thought this could be a fully government program, and we insisted originally on a 50-50 match, and in some places that wasn't realistic, and they lowered the match in places that didn't have the kind of foundations or corporate support around. But we thought this had to be a public-private partnership to really make these things work.
Okay. Culture, cultura. Yesterday, sociologist Martin Sanchez-Jankowski, academic groupie moment here. I remember reading your book in undergrad, so when I met you, I was very excited. But he went there. We really hadn't in this conference touched on culture explicitly, and yesterday afternoon he said, okay, well, what about culture? We've been talking about all of the hard skills and the neurological markers of development for kids, but what about culture, the culture on East Side Los Angeles?
Yeah.
How do we incorporate that into a winning model for the development of our kids in our community?
This is a great challenge that I think we've not done a really good job. There are cultural institutions that often are the culture carriers. If you're lucky, you get a museum or a dance troupe or something else to sort of remind folk about that. But I think that education has not really paid any attention to culture, right? So when you think about the history that happens in this country, it's beginning to change a little bit around now in African-American history, and you get sort of a month dedicated, and occasionally you have other cultures represented for a moment or two. But I think we've lost sight of that, and the reason to me it's so important. I don't know if anybody saw Hidden Figures, the movie about these African-American women who were actually, their brains were like computers, and they helped with getting a person launched into outer space. And I just thought, my God, I loved space, right? And I was so fascinated by that stuff. I had not a clue that African-Americans had anything to do with that whatsoever, right? And you just miss all of these opportunities to hook young people in to their own people, their own sense of who they are, to where they come from when you leave out culture. And unfortunately, it's usually done episodically. You get a week, you get a day, you get a holiday, and it should be part of what young people experience every day in growing up in this country. And I think we need some work on that.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, it's two sides of culture, because different cultures have positive and negative aspects. So the cultural richness that may come in the Latino culture, for example, but at the same time, there can be some negative cultural aspects that keep dragging us behind. So I think kind of that dual approach. I can't talk to you without asking you about measurement. I know you're a big data guy. You like to see the results. You like to see the numbers in front of you, and you're in good company in this conference. Some work on that. So if you could talk to us about what you have found to be the most difficult to measure, and what recommendations you have for good measurement.
Yeah. So I think the most difficult part of measurement is really the fear that people have that measurement is not going to be positive, and therefore the support for their program is going to be undermined. And I tell folks it is going to be bad. And what I've said to funders, who I think are often driving this behavior, right? Because they want you to say everything's good, everything's getting better, I'm the best there ever was, right? I'm going to do a better job than anybody else in the world, I know what to do, and I'm doing it all the time. Right? Anyone who works in this field, that's not true, right? We're all struggling, we're all trying to figure it out. And I've said to folks, the most important thing is to really be clear about what it is you think is important and you want to be held accountable for. So I have folks who come in and tell me, chess, That's it. I can, all the problems kids are dealing with, chess helps the brain, teach logic, they'll do better in math. They got a whole thing going, right, with the chess. And I say, yeah, chess is great, but I like algebra tutors, right? And I think I'll take an algebra tutor over chess any day. But people feel like they have to sell. They have to sell dance, they have to sell sports. And part of what I think is that if you're in the academic measurement business, right? If that's really what you think you're gonna, you better have some real professionals who can have both the skills and the time to drive that academic success. And mostly, I think, folks are trying to convince funders that the other things they're doing is really gonna drive the academic success model, because that's the only thing funders will fund. So part of this, I think, is a funding problem. The other part, I think, is actually it took us about 4 years to get a computer system that would allow us to collect data in real time in a way that was useful. Because now this is when, let's say, now we have 13,000 kids, but let's say we had 5,000 kids. And any given day we had 3,000 kids going through 3 activities each day, right? So you end up with massive amounts of data. And it's one thing to collect the data, it's another thing to use that data and get it back in a real time so that you know how to improve your program. That calls for a back office infrastructure that most people don't want to pay for, right? So today at the Harlem Children's Zone, I have 5 full-time evaluators, PhD levels, costs a small fortune. You want real data, you want real, you have to have people that help you design programs, they help you sort of analyze that data and feed that data back. And again, nobody wants to pay for it. You go to someone and say, look, I want to hire this data person. They're not interested in paying that salary. And so I think if you don't have a sophisticated person helping you with data, you're not going to collect good data. You're going to, I think, be afraid of sort of the results. And all of that, I think, undermines folks with the data collection and evaluation in our field.
So going to a funder and saying, I need a data person isn't sexy, like saying, you know, we need to push these academics with the kids. But it's something that you have to include in your budget when you are going to funders. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Let me ask one more question. I know we're short on time. I want to turn it over to the audience. But in this room, you have a lot of policymakers from every level of government. What is your homework assignment to them in terms of policy that they can promote, that they can push forward in their communities, in their institutions, to see the success like we did with the Harlem Children's Zone?
I think there's an increasing sort of number of examples of programs that actually work, that actually have some data that if it's faithfully replicated, that you can count on it being successful. And I think part of what has to happen is I think the policymakers have to drive the field towards real programs that have a basis in evidence that they work. Often things that don't work but sound good, or pet projects that people have, or things that have always been funded, right? People just keep sort of supporting those things and funding those things. It's sort of like the whole education piece that I find very frustrating. There's increasingly evidence that things will matter and it will produce a real result in young people in a way that's measurable. Obviously, early childhood, we've got some great data out on that. There's some of the folks in the education field, charters and others that are doing, I think, interesting things in that arena. There's some real good stuff happening with teenage pregnancy that I think we see some real results from. I think that the areas that people still struggle is sort of that middle school and high school area. I think some of the toughest places to get really solid data that makes a difference for programmatic folks. But I think if the policymakers lead with evidence first, that we want evidence first, I think the field will begin to make sure that they are themselves replicating programs that have some evidence behind them.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. In the sake of time, what I'd like to do There are a number of mics around the room. If I could take, let's say, 3 questions, and then we'll let Jeff respond to those. All right, I see a couple of folks coming up. All right, we'll go over here.
Hi, Elizabeth Gaines, Forum for Youth Investment. One of the things that I've noticed in my 20 years of being in this child and youth field, starting in practice and now into the policy space, is that child and youth advocates don't have a certain skill set, and that is to understand tax policy, to be good budget negotiators, to understand political campaigns, community organizing. I'm really interested in the fact that, little known fact, this November election, there were 14 local ballot measures on ballots across the country, rural Ohio, suburban Kansas City, places you wouldn't think, that asked voters to tax themselves to pay for children's services, and 11 of those said yes. Some of these were Trump voters coming out saying they also voted for the Children's Services Fund. I'm curious if you have an opinion or advice for this sort of budding movement that we're trying to create to get local folks to not be reliant on the federal government, not be reliant on national foundations, to really turn to their own community to say, should we fund this?
Great.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Matt Singh. I'm with the Low Income Investment Fund, and I guess maybe I'll just preface this question by saying, I consider myself one of the lucky few who's made it out of poverty and has managed to make a successful life for myself by going to college and graduate school. But what I'm wondering is where, in your mind, either in the Harlem Children's Own model or policy more broadly, where does vocational education fit into the picture?
My name is Neha Dalal, and I work on education policy in DC. And so I first heard you speak when you came my freshman year to an undergraduate class at Harvard and came Catherine Merced's classroom. And so my question is, beyond sending you around the country to all these classrooms, how do we get more young people to go into education and create next generation's Harlem Children's Zones?
Great. So thank you all. I will guarantee I won't remember all 3 questions. So first on the issue of, I think, community self-funding for education. I think we've seen evidence. I've certainly seen it in California a number of times where there were measures where community members were asked if they would pay a tax to support children's issues, and they've said yes. I have found that in general, if people in the community think it's going for their kids, not for somebody else's kids, for their kids, that they actually have a willingness to support efforts. I think people are concerned about a couple of things. I think they're concerned about waste. I think they're concerned about corruption. Is the money really going to get to the right kids? And I think they're concerned about access. How do you gain access to this? I think the clearer we can be around what it is we want to raise money for, I think people will sort of say yes. I mean, there's a huge volunteer spirit in America that's unlike most other countries I've been in. I mean, it goes from churches and mosques and synagogues to community organizations to Boys and Girl Scouts and all of those kinds of things, which are just, I think, represent the best of America. And I actually have a lot of confidence that communities will support their children if it's explained to them, right, that this is actually going to do good. So I would say that, I think there is a movement afoot, and it could grow to self-fund some of these areas. Having said that, I will tell you that transparency to me is critical. And if you're going to do that, it has to be transparent. What happened to the money, where it went, who it helped, what the challenges were, if it's going to continue. Otherwise, I think people very quickly think that's not going to work. Around the issue of vocational education, that's a great question, because I actually believe very strongly in vocational education. My belief is that in most places in America, getting into college, there are colleges that requirements are simply that you have to get a high school diploma to get in. right? Community colleges, and now you have to be a straight A student or a B student. So I think one of the things in preparing kids for college is even if they don't go to college, the sort of vocational skills that they're going to be involved in is at least going to require that same amount of education so that kids who end up not going to college can get on a track to get in vocation. But the challenge I have around vocational education is that we cannot tell what the labor market is going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So sending a kid down a path and thinking, you know, that's the right way to go, if that kid doesn't have a broad set of skills that they can be flexible when the labor market changes. I'll give you an example. You know, for a lot of guys, when I was growing up, you know, auto mechanics was like the safest thing, right? You could be an auto mechanic, right? You work with your hands, and then it became really hard. You had to actually have some college level skills to work on cars. Everything became computer. But driving cars was, I think they said it's about a third of guys who don't have a college degree are involved in driving something. And we see what's happening with the self-driving cars, right? So you could be thinking, I'm going to send a kid down that path. But if that's all the skill that kid has, and that kid doesn't have some flexibility and some ability to relearn different things because they've got these basic set of skills, I don't think you're really providing that kid with a good platform.
So Jeff, in other words, it's like a high school degree. Previously,
that's exactly
you know,
right.
Older generations, you got the high school degree and then you could go off. And your vision that you are cementing in your students is it's college, and then do whatever you want aside from that.
I think that's exactly the case. You know, I think one of the time that does not work is when kids don't get through college. When they go to college, they borrow money, they have no degree, and they end up poorer. And that's a bad deal for college. I'll just say, I was doing a tour, and it was a woman, we were trying to raise some money, and the woman said, Jeff, you got this college thing, but my daughter is home for the last 5 months, having graduated from this prestigious school and unable to find a job. I said, I want my kids to be just like your daughter, graduated with degrees looking for a job. That's what I want. I don't know what else you can do, right? You can't say, don't go to school because I think you're going to have a better chance of getting a job, right? Yes. Who knows what's going to happen, right? But at least they're in the ball game. I believe that. So the third question about what do you say to young people? I'm actually excited that I think our field is gaining some prominence. And it's the one, you know, with what happened with Teach for America and with some of the charter schools, the KIPS and Achievement for, there are young people in college who see this profession as one that requires a high degree of intelligence, commitment, that you've got to really be prepared to think outside the box and do new things. And I think that, you know, when I went to school, going to be a teacher, you had to take a vow of poverty. Nobody wanted to do it. It was like I think people now look at this sort of being a social entrepreneur as something that has some status attached to it in a way that it didn't when I was in school. So I believe we've got to get the best and the brightest into this field if we're going to really make a difference. And I'm thinking that there's more young people who are thinking about this today than when I first came out of school, where I think that people were thinking about anything except going into this field.
What a positive note to end on today in thinking about our next generation of educators. Someone who is motivated, passionate, and I like the term of entrepreneur in this. Thank you so much, Jeff. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.